I never realized how arrogant, delusional, and narcissistic my wife was. In her mind, she somehow turned her infidelities into some kind of virtue for herself. These words echoed in my mind as I faced the inconceivable reality of betrayal. The confrontation was intense. She was breathing heavily and passionately, her face and chest flushed. There was a fire in her eyes, a look that made me challenge, and I quit. This story unfolds the journey of love, deception, and the quest for truth amidst the ruins of what I once believed was perfect. Witness the unraveling of illusions. On that chilly and dreary November day, my sight moved across the surrounding landscape, revealing remnants of trees, soot-covered walls, and scattered shards of shattered glass and rubbish thrown across the lot by the unrelenting wind. This sight felt like a metaphor for my life, an empty, burned-out shell filled with loneliness and hatred. As I stood there contemplating what to do next, my attention was pulled to Erina, whom I had met at a charity event a few weeks prior. My cousin Seth invited me to this event, suggesting I use it to increase my network of business opportunities. The evening turned out to be dull, but Erina captured my attention with her grace and confidence. We spent the evening in delightful conversation, and I decided to invite her to dinner. Our meeting was full of common interests, and I was soon drawn to her. We dated for several months until our affection deepened. Despite my hesitation and uncertainty, Erina took the lead one evening, demonstrating that desire is not exclusive to men. She offered me a ride that could have formed a mechanical bull racing team, and by the end, I was extremely exhausted. It was the most fun I'd ever had in my life. From that point forward, intimacy in our relationship grew more frequent and easy. We were living together within a few months of meeting, and just over a year later, we got married. We moved into a 4-bedroom house in a wonderful, tree-filled neighborhood, did some landscaping, acquired a dog, and life was great. Almost every aspect of marriage suited me. I reveled in the end of my loneliness, the unconditional emotional support, the physical satisfaction from meaningful sex, and having someone to love and adore. It was everything I desired and more. Of course, there were some issues. I was always a little busy at work, which irritated Erina, and there were probably a few more behaviors she disliked. Naturally, something angered me too. Perhaps the most difficult challenge was that we had to interact with her family far more than I would have liked. Don't get me wrong, I didn't detest her family. They were good, decent folks with generally courteous demeanors and no particularly disagreeable personality features, but I didn't want to spend too much time with them. Her parents were an outgoing, cheerful pair who seemed to like me, yet they lectured us on how we should live and put a lot of pressure on us to have children. But we never spent enough time together for it to bother me, so it wasn't a big deal. Her younger sister, Mindy, and her husband were a little more difficult for me. Mindy was a shorter and slightly rounder counterpart of Erina. She dressed and talked like Erina, and when Erina was there, she never left her side for more than a few minutes. They were like virtual Siamese twins, talking conspiratorially, laughing at inside jokes, and openly gossiping about friends and relatives. Because she and her husband lived 15 minutes away from us, we spent a lot of time together. That's fine, I think, and perhaps it was jealousy. But while she was with Mindy, she was not truly with me, and it was quite unpleasant. Mindy's spouse did not make matters any better. He was a tall, fair-haired, attractive man named Christian, friendly, easygoing, and in my opinion, not that smart. He took over his family's furniture store in Joliet, which became his favorite and occasionally only topic of conversation. He spoke about the store as if it were Microsoft, and he was Bill Gates, boasting about how wonderfully it was run and how no one else in the furniture industry knew what they were doing. The difficulty with this viewpoint was that the store was struggling, and I was confident that anyone who knew anything about business would recognize Christian as a contributing factor. But I wanted peace and happiness for Erina, which included not causing problems with her family. So I spent more than one evening simply nodding my head as I listened to Christian drone on. We had been married nearly 2 years when Erina initially requested me to assist Mindy and Christian. She had planned a wonderful meal, complete with candles and music to set the mood, and she was dressed in a way that promised a relaxing night in bed. So, like a normal new spouse, I assumed she was only interested in having a fantastic romantic evening with me. But as the evening progressed, it became evident that she had her own ideas. She continued to express how fortunate we were to have such a large salary and how she felt compelled to help Mindy and Christian. She pleaded with me to loan them money, despite knowing our savings were earmarked for our future. Reluctantly, I agreed, not wanting to create tension. It became a recurring theme. Erina's unwavering dedication to her sister often put a strain on our marriage. I never realized how deeply intertwined her loyalty to Mindy was with her own sense of identity. She saw herself as a savior, a beacon of support, even at the expense of our own stability. And in the midst of it all, I began to see the cracks in our seemingly perfect life. Erina's infidelities were not just acts of betrayal, they were manifestations of her need for validation, her way of justifying her actions as part of a larger, twisted narrative of selflessness and sacrifice. As the years passed, the weight of her deceit grew heavier, and the illusions we had built around our love began to crumble. The facade of our perfect life was shattered, and I was left to pick up the pieces, questioning everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and commitment. In the end, I realized that true love cannot flourish in the shadow of lies, and sometimes the only way to find the truth is to walk away from the ruins and start anew. Witness the unraveling of illusions, and join me on this journey of love, deception, and the quest for truth amidst the ruins of what I once believed was perfect. We were in an excellent position to aid others. Then, with an expression of practical sadness, Irina revealed that she was concerned about Mindy and Christian's ability to get by. It turned out that Christian owed a significant amount of money and was having trouble making payments. Without assistance, he would be unable to complete his inventory list. I instantly saw where this was going and got right to work. "Liv, how much do they need?" I asked. She paused and raised her eyebrows, indicating that I had misunderstood her plan presentation. She nibbled her lip, considered for a moment, and then looked shyly into my eyes. "He needs either 50 or 60,000. This will give them freedom and confidence." I nearly choked. Yes, we were doing well, but the majority of my money was held in a family trust, and that sum would have made a significant dent in our existing cash. I knew I could pull the money out of the trust if I absolutely needed it, but I didn't want to explain it to Bernie Blackman, our chief business attorney and trust administrator. He would do what I asked, but I knew that for the foreseeable future, he would be arguing with me to get the money back. He was not cruel. He simply took his responsibility to protect the trust funds and the business extremely seriously. As I thought about it, it was the only time in our marriage that I attempted to dismiss Erina's serious request. "I don't know, Liv. That is a lot of money." She frowned. "Mimi claims he has some amazing ideas and that they would repay the money straight immediately. If money is your main concern, they make a nice living. I'm certain of it." Well, I wasn't certain about that. In fact, I was certain that sending it to Christian would result in a large loss of money, but I wanted Erina to be pleased. So I wrote out a check for 60,000 and informed her that this meant we'd have to save a little money until the money came back. I once heard that if you lend money to a relative, presume you will never see them again. This prepares you emotionally so that the relationship does not suffer if they do not refund the money. So to my understanding, it was a gift. The $60,000 gift to Irina's sister and somewhat inept brother-in-law, which I didn't think would fix the problem because I knew he wasn't a good enough businessman to run his own shop, even with money. I was unhappy, but I wanted to be a decent guy for her and her family. I wanted to please them and was willing to spend $60,000 to do so. 3 to 4 months after I loaned Christian the money, I was at home, looking for a flash disk that had crucial data. I had a poor tendency of leaving critical items in unexpected places, so I almost looted the entire house. After searching all the normal locations, I went into the guest room and looked around the table and under the bed. When I stood up, I observed that it was abnormally lumpy, at least by Irina's standards, and that there was far more disorder than I was going to make with my little search. It was clear that someone had been lying in it, and then hastily pulled up the sheets and blankets without properly preparing it. It didn't seem like a huge thing to me at the time, but later that evening, I unintentionally mentioned it to Irina. "Hey, did anyone sleep in the guest bed? I went there lately and it was somewhat unkempt," I replied. Irina started to stutter her response and appeared hot and uncomfortable. "Well, I had a nap there earlier, sorry. I was cleaning and was so exhausted that I immediately hopped into bed with no time to clean anything." At that point in our marriage, I trusted Irina so much that I couldn't imagine her explanation being anything other than the God's honest truth. In fact, I remember finding it amusing that she was scared or embarrassed because she needed to take a nap in the middle of the day, and that the blanket wasn't the only clue I overlooked. Over the next year or two, a series of bizarre, incomprehensible events occurred that, if I hadn't stuck my head so far up my ass, would have shown Irina's lack of virtue. For example, I took it for granted that her normally calm job as an assistant manager at a small independent bookshop now forced her to attend a 5 or 6 hour uninterrupted meeting every Tuesday, a meeting so crucial that I shouldn't have attempted to contact her at that time. I also accepted any explanations for the little bruises that appeared on her body, some of them in rather private areas. There were undies in the laundry that I couldn't recall her wearing. And then there was the story about orange juice. Irina began shopping at a new high-end grocery store, which wasn't too bad, except that she couldn't get many of the goods they wanted, including my favorite brand of orange juice. I objected about it and advised her to switch stores, but she argued that the new store was better and more convenient for her because it was immediately on her way home from Tuesday meetings. Her grocery shopping habits may not appear to be a strong indicator that she was cheating, but the knowledge was what finally prompted me to stop and reflect, leading to the epiphany that crushed my heart. As the reality of her deceit settled in, the once clear image of our perfect life became a distorted reflection. Irina's betrayal wasn't just an act of infidelity, it was a revelation of her true character: selfish, manipulative, and utterly devoid of the virtues I had once believed defined her. The pain of her actions was intensified by the realization that I had been blind to the warning signs, choosing to see only what I wanted to believe. In the end, the truth shattered the illusions we had built our life upon. The trust, the love, the commitment, it all crumbled in the face of her lies. As I stood there, amidst the ruins of our marriage, I knew that moving forward would be the only path to healing. Irina's actions had irreversibly altered the course of our lives, but they had also set me free. Free to rebuild, free to find genuine love, and free to live a life grounded in honesty and integrity. Less than 18 months after the first loan, Irina hinted that Christian and Mindy would require further funds. By that point, he had not repaid even a portion of the original $60,000, and I didn't want to pay any more money, especially to support an enterprise that I felt was unsustainable. So I declined Irina's offer, hoping she would get the idea and stop asking. But she persisted, warning that if they didn't improve and buy more goods, they might lose business. Still trying to be Mr. Popular, I felt unable to say no openly, so I eventually agreed to see Christian's business plan and tour the store to see what he intended to do. I hoped Irina would back off if I proved that this was a bad investment. I met Christian at his business on a Monday morning. He walked me around, showed me the floor plan, introduced me to the staff, and patted me on the back as if we were the best of friends. When we stopped to talk to someone, he spoke about his business strategy with tremendous confidence, almost insincerity, stating his belief that with a little more money to boost inventory and make a few renovations, the store would immediately turn a substantial profit. Christian and I sat in his office for half an hour, and I expressed my concerns as delicately as possible. I told him that I thought the company had some serious problems. I hinted that unless he could optimize and reduce expenses and pricing, he was unlikely to grow client interest and revenue, even with the improvements he intended to make. I even gently recommended that he consider selling the business and pursue other work. But he was insulted and insisted that a facelift was all that was required to rectify the situation. I didn't have the heart to turn down his request for money, so I explained that I didn't have enough personal funds to grant him a substantial loan and that it would have to come from a trust. I told him I would go back and speak with Bernie to see if he could clear the way for the loan, but I couldn't guarantee anything. My strategy was to minimize controversy and make it appear as if I was making a genuine attempt to acquire him money before breaking the bad news and blaming Bernie for turning him down. I realized it was cowardly, but I wanted to retain harmony in the family and didn't want to lose so much money. In reality, Bernie would do nearly anything I requested him to do, but I always made it clear to everyone I knew that he needed to maintain strict control over the trust and that I couldn't override his judgments. It may seem unjust to make Bernie the evil guy, but to be honest, I believe he relished the job and never complained to me about it. At the end of the conversation, Christian nodded and smiled confidently, indicating that he believed he would receive the credit. He shook my hand firmly and stroked my back again, making me feel even more awful as I walked away. Returning home, I dreaded the upcoming conversation with Irina. As expected, she was eagerly awaiting my return, her eyes filled with hope and anticipation. I took a deep breath and relayed the events of the day, including my concerns about Christian's business. Irina's face fell, her disappointment palpable. "Liv, I understand you want to help your sister and Christian, but we can't keep pouring money into a failing business. It's not sustainable," I said gently. Irina's eyes filled with tears, and she bit her lip. "But they need our help. We can't just abandon them." "It's not about abandoning them. It's about being realistic. Christian needs to find a different approach or perhaps a new line of work altogether. Another loan won't solve the underlying issues." For a moment, Irina was silent. Then she nodded slowly. "I suppose you're right. I just hate seeing them struggle. I know, we'll find other ways to support them, but financially, we have to draw the line." With a heavy heart, I watched as Irina grappled with the situation. I wanted to make her happy, but not at the cost of our financial stability. In the days that followed, we tried to find ways to help Christian and Mindy without more loans. It wasn't easy, and tensions occasionally flared, but we managed to maintain a semblance of peace. Months later, Christian's business inevitably continued to struggle, but he finally took steps to reduce costs and improve operations. It wasn't the miraculous turnaround he had hoped for, but it was progress. And Irina and I learned to navigate the delicate balance of family loyalty and financial responsibility, emerging stronger for the trials we had faced together. I drove away from the parking lot and onto the highway, mulling over my meeting with Christian and trying to mentally cleanse myself of the timidity and borderline dishonesty I had shown in his business. Lost in thought and barely aware of my surroundings, I suddenly noticed something that initially seemed like an odd coincidence, but quickly grew into a troubling realization. It was a smaller grocery store, painted green and featuring a large sign that read Salvador's. The store's name struck me as peculiar. I was certain I had never seen anything like it before, yet it nagged at the back of my mind. I puzzled over this for a few minutes before it dawned on me. Irina had started shopping at a supermarket that didn't carry my favorite orange juice, but was much closer to home. However, this store, Salvador's, wasn't near her workplace, our home, or anywhere else that would make sense for her to frequent. A gnawing suspicion began to form. I made a U-turn, drove past Salvador's, and headed back to Christian's furniture store. I parked and sat there for a few minutes, contemplating all the reasons Irina might shop there. I checked my phone to see if there were any other Salvador's stores in Chicago and spent 15 to 20 minutes considering all the possibilities. Maybe Irina had another office nearby, met Mindy for lunch, or frequented a health club or some other place in the vicinity. However, my mind kept returning to a conclusion I didn't want to face. Feeling a sudden urge to get more facts and confront Christian directly, I got out of the car and hurried to the front entrance of the furniture store. The sign on the glass door stated the store was open until late on weekdays, except for Tuesdays when it closed at noon. My suspicion grew stronger. After pushing the door open, I entered the store and approached the first employee I saw, an awkward middle-aged man making coffee. "I'm sorry, but I'm about to take a break," he said irritably. "I don't want to take up much of your time, but I urgently need to speak with Christian McCloy. We've discussed some serious financial matters, and I need more information, I explained, trying to sound authoritative. But he continued, stirring his coffee, taking a sip and ignoring my request. Frustrated, I took a deep breath and repeated with more urgency, "This is very important. Could you please call him for me?" He looked at me strangely at first, but then seemed to recognize me. "You're the guy who was here earlier with Christian, right?" "Yes, that's right. It's crucial that I speak with him," I insisted. The employee hesitated for a moment before reluctantly pulling out his phone and dialing Christian's number. As he did, I felt my heart pound in my chest, anxiety and dread mixing into a tight knot in my stomach. I had no idea what I was about to uncover, but I knew I had to follow this through. Christian answered on the second ring, and the employee relayed my message. Moments later, Christian emerged from the back office, looking both surprised and slightly annoyed to see me again. "Stan, what's going on?" he asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and impatience. "I need to talk to you, Christian. It's about Erina and something I just realized," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Christian's expression shifted, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "Okay, let's go to my office," he said, leading the way. Once inside, I shut the door behind us and turned to face him. "Christian, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there something going on between you and Erina? Because things aren't adding up, and I need to know the truth." Christian's eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed taken aback. Then, as if steeling himself, he sighed and looked me straight in the eye. "Stan, you deserve to know the truth. Yes, Erina and I have been seeing each other." The admission hit me like a punch to the gut. My world spun, and I had to steady myself against the desk. The betrayal I felt was overwhelming, but at least now I had the truth, a picture I could no longer ignore. The confrontation was now inevitable, and my resolve solidified as I waited for Christian. He entered the break room, his face breaking into a smile when he saw me. "Stan, what brings you back so soon? Did you forget something?" I didn't waste any time. "Christian, we need to talk," I said, my voice firm. His smile faded, replaced by a wary look. I motioned to the sofa. "Do you recognize this?" Christian glanced at the sofa, then back at me, his expression unreadable. "It's the break room couch. What's this about?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "I know about you and Erina. I know what you've been doing here." Christian's eyes widened, and for a moment, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. He quickly composed himself, trying to regain control of the situation. "I don't know what you're talking about, Stan. Don't lie to me, Christian. I have evidence. If you don't come clean right now, I'll take everything I have to Mindy and the rest of the family." He hesitated, weighing his options. The silence stretched, and I could see the gears turning in his head. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "All right, Stan, you win. Yes, Erina and I have been seeing each other." The admission was a blow, even though I had expected it. It took all my strength not to react, to keep my composure. "Why, Christian? Why do this to Mindy?" "To me." Christian ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely distressed. "It just happened, Stan. I didn't plan for it, and I never wanted to hurt anyone. Erina, she was unhappy. She needed someone, and I was there." "That's no excuse," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You both betrayed your spouses, your families. This is unforgivable." He nodded, looking defeated. "I know, and I'm sorry, but it's out now. What are you going to do?" I took a step back, needing to put some distance between us. "First, I'm going to tell Erina that I know. Then, I'm going to talk to Mindy. You need to prepare for what's coming, Christian. This isn't just going to blow over." Christian looked like he wanted to say something, but he stayed silent. I turned and walked out of the break room, my mind reeling from the confrontation. The drive home was a blur, my thoughts consumed by the upcoming conversation with Erina. When I arrived home, Erina was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. She looked up and smiled, but her smile faltered when she saw the expression on my face. "Stan, what's wrong?" "We need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She set down the knife she was holding, her eyes filled with concern and fear. "Okay, let's sit down." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had shared so many meals and conversations. But this time was different. This time, the truth was about to shatter the illusion of our perfect life. "I know about you and Christian. I said, watching her reaction closely. Her face went pale, and she looked like she was about to cry, but she didn't deny it. Stan, I'm so sorry. Sorry isn't enough, Irina. You've broken my trust, our marriage. Why? Why would you do this? She took a deep breath, tears streaming down her face. I was lonely, Stan. You were always working, and I felt neglected. Christian was there for me. He made me feel wanted, loved. I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. So you thought it was okay to cheat? To betray me and Mindy? No, I didn't think it was okay. It just happened. I know it's not an excuse, but it's the truth. I stood up, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. This is over, Irina. I can't do this anymore. We're done. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. But I couldn't comfort her. Not this time. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions. The days that followed were a whirlwind of difficult conversations and painful decisions. I told Mindy the truth, and she was devastated. Christian tried to apologize, but there was no fixing what he had broken. I contacted Bernice and initiated the divorce proceedings. It was a long, arduous process, but it was necessary. I needed to move on, to rebuild my life without Irina. In the end, I found solace in the support of my family and friends. And though the pain of betrayal lingered, I knew that I would heal in time. The experience had taught me a valuable lesson about trust and the importance of honesty in a relationship. As I looked to the future, I promised myself that I would never let anyone betray me like that again. And with that promise, I took the first steps towards a new beginning. He warned against it, adding that if you owe someone money, especially someone who isn't looking out for your best interests, they have you by the balls. I wanted to take Christian by the balls. Looking back inside Christian's office, I noticed him standing and shaking hands with the supplier. I waved and grinned. He waved back, led the supplier to the door, and dashed back to the break room. Hey, John, did you forget anything? You need more information? I shook my head, smiling. Listen, Christian, I thought about it, and I believe I may have given the wrong impression today. I hope you understand. I think you're a fantastic businessman, and I believe you have a real chance to succeed with the store. However, as I was leaving, I realized that I may have misunderstood when I inquired about your plans in case things did not go as planned. He smiled back. No, John, I've got it. A good businessman asks uncomfortable questions. Great, great. I just wanted to let you know that I really enjoy what you're doing here. However, I need some time to get things sorted with the trust. Bernie is very particular about these things, but I'm confident we can work something out. Christian looked relieved, his smile widening. Thanks, John. I really appreciate it. I know with your help, we can turn this place around. I nodded, maintaining the facade of support. Absolutely, Christian. I'll be in touch soon. As I left the store, I felt a surge of determination. I needed to gather undeniable proof of their betrayal. Confronting Christian without it could ruin everything and make it difficult to establish their guilt. I was certain that if I could figure out when and where their trysts were happening, I could catch them in the act. I decided to hire a private investigator, someone who could follow Irina and Christian, get photos, videos, anything that would leave no room for doubt. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about getting even, reclaiming my dignity, and ensuring that neither of them could deny their actions. Within a few days, I had a meeting with a highly recommended private investigator named Sarah. I laid out the situation, feeling a strange mixture of shame and anger as I recounted the events. I need concrete evidence, I told her. Photos, videos, timestamps, anything that can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they're having an affair. Sarah nodded, taking notes. Understood. I'll start by tracking their movements, focusing on the times and places you suspect. If they're meeting regularly, we should have something within a week or two. I thanked her and left the meeting, feeling a flicker of hope amidst the turmoil. If everything went according to plan, I would soon have the evidence I needed. The waiting was agonizing. Each day felt like an eternity as I went about my routine, trying to act normal around Irina while knowing that my marriage was unraveling behind the scenes. But I kept my composure, knowing that any slip-up could tip her off. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sarah called. I've got something, she said. Meet me at my office. I arrived at her office, my heart pounding. She handed me a folder filled with photos and a USB drive. These were taken over the past week. There's no doubt about it. Irina and Christian are definitely involved. I opened the folder, my hands shaking. The photos were explicit, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Irina and Christian, in various compromising positions, clearly oblivious to the world around them. The betrayal was laid bare before my eyes. I clenched my fists, feeling a wave of anger and sadness wash over me. But amidst the pain, there was also a sense of vindication. I finally had the proof I needed. "Thank you, Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "You've done an excellent job." "You're welcome," she replied. "What will you do now?" I took a deep breath, thinking about my next steps. First, I'm going to confront Irina. Then, I'm going to make sure Christian understands the consequences of his actions. Armed with the evidence, I returned home, ready to face Irina. The confrontation was inevitable, and this time, I was prepared. When she walked in, I stood up, holding the folder. "We need to talk, Irina." She looked at me, confusion and fear flickering across her face. "What is it, John?" I tossed the folder onto the table, the photos spilling out. "Explain these." Her face went pale as she looked at the photos, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find words. "How long?" I demanded, my voice cold. "How long have you been cheating on me with Christian?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "John, I'm so sorry. It just happened. Spare me the excuses," I snapped. "You betrayed me, and now you're going to face the consequences." The confrontation was brutal, every word laced with the bitterness of betrayal. By the end, Irina was a sobbing mess, but I felt no sympathy. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. Next, I went to see Christian. He was at the store, looking smug and confident, but that confidence shattered when I showed him the photos. "You think you can mess with my life and get away with it?" I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Think again. You're going to pay me back every cent, and if you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are." Christian's face turned ashen, and he stammered out promises to repay the money. I knew it would be a long process, but I was determined to see it through. In the end, I filed for divorce, cutting Irina out of my life for good. The process was painful, but it was also a relief. I was free from the lies and deceit, ready to rebuild my life on my terms. As I moved forward, I kept the photos and videos as a reminder of what I had endured and what I had overcome. They were a testament to my strength and resilience, a symbol of my victory over betrayal. And with each passing day, the pain lessened, replaced by a growing sense of peace and hope for the future. He warned against it, adding that if you owe someone money, especially someone who isn't looking out for your best interests, they have you by the balls. I wanted to take Christian by the balls. Looking back inside Christian's office, I noticed him standing and shaking hands with the supplier. I waved and grinned. He waved back, led the supplier to the door, and dashed back to the break room. "Hey, John, did you forget anything? You need more information?" I shook my head, smiling. "Listen, Christian, I thought about it, and I believe I may have given the wrong impression today. I hope you understand. I think you're a fantastic businessman, and I believe you have a real chance to succeed with the store. However, as I was leaving, I realized that I may have misunderstood when I inquired about your plans in case things did not go as planned." He smiled back. "No, John, I've got it. A good businessman asks uncomfortable questions." Great. I just wanted to let you know that I really enjoy what you're doing here. Besides, you're a family member, and I have to believe this isn't simply a risky investment. It is the best move you can make as a friend, family member, and businessman. So, I didn't want you to go home without knowing that I was going to work hard to obtain this money for you. I can't imagine we won't get it. As previously said, I do not have a large amount of money in my own accounts, so I must request a trust fund withdrawal. But honestly, I believe I can persuade Bernie to give in, and we will get the money for you." Christian listened with an expectant grin on his face, which grew wider as I spoke. "Man, that sounds fantastic. I'm telling you, this business is about to take off, so this loan is equally safe with me as it is with the bank. You have absolutely no need to be concerned." "I am not worried at all, Christian. Bernie, of course, will have to reach some sort of deal because he insists on preserving the trust with collateral and whatnot." If you're okay with this, I can get everything signed within a few days. I believe you will receive the money within a week." The following morning, I entered Bernie's office, closed the door, and sat down in a chair. Bernie was talking on the phone, taking notes, and raising one finger to indicate that he would soon be able to speak. I was visibly twitching as he ended the call, and he apparently noticed because after hanging up, he looked at me in astonishment and asked, "So, John, what made you so nervous this morning?" Taking a deep breath, I launched into my explanation. "Bernie, I've got a situation. Irina's brother-in-law, Christian, has been struggling with his furniture store. He's asked for a substantial loan, and I promised him I'd see what I could do. But Bernie, there's more to it. I have reason to believe that Christian and Irina are having an affair. I need your help to navigate this." Bernie's eyes widened, and he leaned back in his chair, taking it all in. "John, this is serious. You need concrete evidence before making any financial decisions or accusations. We can't move forward on assumptions." "I know, Bernie. That's why I need your advice. I hired a private investigator, and she has gathered some evidence. I just need to know the best way to handle this situation." Bernie nodded thoughtfully. "First things first, let's review the evidence. Once we have a clear picture, we can decide on the next steps. As for the loan, I'll draft an agreement that protects the trust's interests. If Christian agrees to the terms, we can proceed cautiously." I handed over the folder containing the photos and USB drive. Bernie reviewed the contents, his expression growing more serious with each passing minute. "This is damning evidence, John. With this, you have a solid case. We can use this to confront both Irina and Christian, but be prepared for a difficult and emotional confrontation." "Thank you, Bernie. I appreciate your support. Let's proceed with the loan agreement, but I'll hold off on finalizing anything until I've confronted them." With a plan in place, I felt a sense of determination. I would confront Irina and Christian, armed with the evidence and the support of Bernie. This betrayal would not go unpunished. That evening, I returned home, my mind racing with thoughts of the upcoming confrontation. Irina greeted me with her usual smile, but I could see a flicker of unease in her eyes. "John, is everything okay?" she asked, sensing my tension. "Irina, we need to talk," I replied, my voice steady. "It's about Christian and the loan he's requested." Her expression shifted from concern to apprehension. "What about it?" I took a deep breath and began. "I know about the affair, Irina. I have evidence, photos, videos, timestamps. There's no denying it." Her face went pale, and she took a step back, her eyes wide with shock. "John, I can explain." "Save it," I said coldly. "You've betrayed me, and now there are consequences. We're done, Irina. I'm filing for divorce, and I expect you to move out immediately." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the fallout. Next, I went to see Christian at his store. He looked surprised to see me again so soon. "John, what brings you back?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "We need to talk, Christian," I said, my voice firm. "I know about the affair with Irina. I have evidence. This loan, it's not happening, and I expect you to repay every cent of the money I've already lent you." Christian's face turned ashen, and he stammered out a response. "John, please, I can explain." "No explanations," I interrupted. "You've betrayed my trust and my family. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." I left the store, feeling a mix of anger and relief. The confrontation was difficult, but it was necessary. I had taken the first steps toward reclaiming my life and my dignity. In the following weeks, I moved forward with the divorce proceedings, supported by Bernie's legal expertise. Irina moved out, and I began the process of healing and rebuilding. It was a challenging time, but with each passing day, I felt a sense of liberation. As I moved on, I reflected on the lessons learned. Trust is fragile, and betrayal cuts deep. But in the end, I emerged stronger, ready to face whatever the future held. Christian's lawyer, a small, muscular man named Tim, was already present, looking over the document with a keen eye. Tim's expression was serious as he glanced between Christian and the papers in front of him. "Okay, Christian," Tim began, his voice calm but firm. "I've reviewed this document thoroughly, and while it seems standard for a business loan, there are a few critical points you need to understand before signing." Christian, with his usual confident smile, nodded. "Sure, Tim, let's hear it." Tim took a deep breath and began explaining. First, the loan amount is $425,000 to be repaid over 7 years. The interest rate is reasonable, but it means your monthly payments will be a bit over $6,000. These payments start immediately. Christian nodded again, his smile unwavering. Got it. What's next? The actual amount you'll receive is $365,000, Tim continued. This is because the $60,000 loan from a few years ago is being consolidated into this new loan. So John will receive the $60,000 back, and you'll get the rest. Understand? Christian's smile faltered slightly, but returned quickly. Yeah, I see. Go on. Tim's gaze hardened a bit. Now, the collateral. This loan is secured by both your business and the property you own. If you default, John has the right to seize these assets. Are you clear on that? Christian nodded, though his confidence seemed to waver just a bit. Yes, I understand. Good, Tim said, leaning back slightly. This means that if you fail to make the payments, you risk losing both your business and the property. This is a serious commitment, Christian. Are you sure you're prepared for it? Christian hesitated, looking at me for reassurance. I maintained a neutral expression, waiting for his response. After a moment, he took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, I'm prepared. I'll make it work. Tim sighed, then nodded. All right, if you're sure, let's sign the documents. Christian picked up the pen and signed the papers with a flourish, handing them back to Tim, who gave a final nod of approval. The deal was done. As I left Christian's office, I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. The trap was set, and now all I had to do was wait. The following weeks were tense. I maintained a facade of support while secretly monitoring Christian's business. It didn't take long for the first cracks to appear. Despite his confident demeanor, Christian's management skills were sorely lacking, and the business struggled to stay afloat. One evening, I sat down with Irina for dinner. She seemed distant, her mind clearly elsewhere. I decided to confront her subtly. How was your day, Liv? I asked, keeping my tone casual. Irina looked up, forcing a smile. It was fine, just the usual work stuff. Anything interesting happen? I pressed, watching her closely. She shook her head, her smile faltering. No, not really. I decided to push a little further. You know, I drove by Salvador's the other day. It's a bit out of the way, isn't it? Irina's eyes widened slightly, and she quickly looked down at her plate. Oh yeah, I go there sometimes. It's on the way back from the bookshop. Really? I said, feigning surprise. I thought the bookshop was in the opposite direction. She hesitated, her cheeks flushing. Well, sometimes I just like to take a different route, for a change of scenery. I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation. But inside, I knew I was getting closer to the truth. A few days later, I hired a private investigator. If Irina and Christian were cheating, I needed undeniable proof. The investigator, a seasoned professional named Mike, assured me he would get to the bottom of it. For the next week, I waited anxiously for Mike's report. Finally, he called me with the news. John, I've got something for you, Mike said, his voice serious. You might want to sit down for this. I felt my heart pound as I sat at my desk. Go ahead, Mike. What did you find? He sighed. I followed Irina on her usual Tuesday meeting day. She didn't go to the bookshop or any other work-related place. Instead, she drove straight to Christian's store. I have photos of them together in the break room, looking very intimate. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of nausea. And Christian? Did you get anything on him? Mike hesitated. Yeah, after Irina left, Christian stayed behind. I managed to get a few shots of him with another woman. Not as incriminating, but definitely suspicious. I thanked Mike and hung up, feeling a mix of rage and despair. The evidence was clear. Irina and Christian were betraying me. That evening, I confronted Irina with the photos. Her face turned pale as she realized she was caught. Why, Irina? I asked, my voice shaking. Why would you do this to me? She burst into tears, unable to meet my gaze. I'm so sorry, John. I don't know what I was thinking. It just happened. I shook my head, feeling a deep sense of betrayal. We're done, Irina. I can't stay with someone who would betray me like this. As she packed her things and left, I felt a strange sense of relief. The deception was over, and now I could focus on the next step, dealing with Christian. The following morning, I called Bernie and informed him of the situation. He agreed to start the foreclosure process on Christian's business and property immediately. Within a few months, Christian's business was seized, and he was left with nothing. Erina tried to reach out to me several times, but I ignored her. I was done with both of them. As I sat in my office, looking over the final documents, I felt a sense of closure. Justice had been served, and I could finally move on with my life. Dear readers, what do you think of this story of betrayal and revenge? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping tales. Christian asked his lawyer, Tim, a small but muscular man who also happened to be his cousin, to meet with us and go over the documents. Okay, sir, I began addressing Tim. I looked at it last night, and it pretty much matches my expectations for a company loan. But Christian, there are a few things I'd like to point out before you sign. All right, Christian replied with his usual polite smile. Sure, give me the details. Tim cleared his throat and looked intently at Christian. I could sense a hint of contempt in his eyes, as if he knew how little Christian understood about running a business. First, the $425,000 loan will be repaid over 7 years. You've got a fairly standard rate here. Payments will begin immediately, totaling a little more than $6,000 per month. Christian nodded. The actual amount you'll receive will only be $365,000 because we are combining it with your loan from a few years ago. John will get $60,000 and you'll get the rest. Is that clear? I see, Christian said smugly with a faint Italian accent. Tim looked at him again and spoke quietly. The loan is secured by collateral. This includes both your business and the property above Kayak. Is this where they hunt ducks? Yes, Christian gestured to Bernie while speaking with Tim. They want to protect John's trust in case the business fails, but that won't happen. The business is in excellent shape, I believe, and Bernie Black seems to think so too. He nodded and smiled at me, and John absolutely believed it as well. Seriously, John? Yes, I responded with as much enthusiasm as I could muster. Christian showed me the books, and I believe he's got a winner here. I grinned. I'm not sure if you know Bernie, but he's quite conservative and always analyzes the worst-case scenario. He wants to make sure the trust is protected, so it's crucial to him that if the business collapses for any inexplicable reason, there's something to compensate the trust. Tim frowned, then stared at Christian. Do you understand that if you default, you risk losing the business transferred to the trust, as well as the land for duck hunting? This land has been in our family for a very long time. Christian spoke sincerely, perhaps to show Tim that he understood and took the warning seriously. I understand the consequences. Still would. To be honest, I am quite confident in the business, and I believe that taking out this loan is far safer than trying to run it without it. Do you understand that fines start accruing 3 months after an insufficient payment? Right, I fully understand. He smiled at me as if we shared a secret, as if he knew I would never let Bernie apply punitive fines for anything other than the most heinous offenses. I simply smiled back at him. Erina was overjoyed. She went on and on about how Christian's business would thrive now that he had enough money to address his key issues. I somehow managed not to say what I actually wanted to say, which was that Christian was the major problem, and no amount of money would address it. But for the next 2 weeks, keeping my mouth shut regarding Christian's commercial ability was the easiest thing I could do around Erina. I needed more knowledge to end my marriage the way I intended, and it would take some time, so I knew I'd have to control my emotions, which ranged from melancholy to wrath and disgust whenever I thought of her deception. Having supper with her without erupting became a challenge, and sex was avoided whenever possible. And since I had no doubt, I was forced to rely on memories of a fairly nasty sexual event from many years before. When I was 18, my buddies and I traveled to San Diego for spring break. We spent one night in Tijuana to unwind. We drank, watched some extremely explicit and frankly gut-wrenching sex shows, and came away with a few. I somehow ended up paired with a woman in her 30s who had obviously had a difficult life. She was not particularly attractive, and she may have been much less appealing than I recall. Given that my perception of aesthetic attractiveness was obviously influenced by a high blood alcohol level, even in this state, I had severe reservations about taking her to bed, and I began to make excuses to get out. But my buddies hounded me, questioning my manhood, sexual orientation, and everything else, making me feel as if I had no choice. I hurriedly faked a smile, drank a few more drinks, gritted my teeth, and followed her into the damp, filthy private room above the bar to get down to work. Now, in order to get the job done, I realized I had to pretend she wasn't there, that she was just a sexual device. I ended up treating her as a piece of meat, having her, and enjoying her despite the noise from the bar, the cramped quarters, the unclean linens, and the foul odors. She let off. So during the next 3 weeks when I had sex with Erina, she returned to that image in my mind. I closed my eyes, pressed my nose against her, and hugged her as I had that unfortunate Mexican girl all those years before. Nothing soft or affectionate, only a biological function. Once I started, it was almost too simple to have her as hard and fast as I could. I was quite harsh with my method. Unsurprisingly, Irina noticed the differences and eventually mentioned them. She lamented that she hoped she could have had some gentle romantic sex when we got into bed. However, she did not appear to dislike how we had it and pondered it. I'm a whore, which is a step up from the sex we had previously had. In another life, I believe she would have made a lot of money off American tourists visiting Tijuana. Obtaining conclusive evidence of an affair turned out to be about as simple as I expected. Christian utilized some of the money to renovate the business, and throughout the day, there were several workmen completing repairs. I correctly predicted that the electrician, who had $1,500 in his back pocket, would install a camera and recording device in one of the light fittings on a Monday morning, around a month after Christian received the money over the sofa in the living room. In 2 days, he will have everything cleaned up. I now had a good notion of what Christian and Erina were up to, so I believed I was ready for what I'd see through the webcam. I decided to sit in my office at work with a drink and some chips and take everything in as objectively as possible, as if I were watching a film. It turns out that seeing your wife have sex with another man is far worse than simply knowing it's happening. Much worse. By the end of the recording, I had consumed so much scotch that I couldn't make it home. I vomited twice on my desk and threw a paperweight at my office door in a fit of drunken rage. The details were mostly what you'd anticipate. On Tuesday, I started the recording early in the day and fast-forwarded through it until I saw a woman in a blue dress enter the room with a large shopping bag. She took fresh sheets from the bag and spread them over the sofa. I instantly reduced the recording to regular speed and grimly confirmed that the woman was Erina. After changing the linens, she opened the bag again and pulled out a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. She removed her blue dress, folded it neatly, and placed it back in the bag before waiting on the edge of the bed, wearing thigh-high stockings, French-cut underwear, and a revealing bra while reading a novel. It was oddly surreal, reminiscent of a strange performance art exhibition I once witnessed in New York, where a scantily clothed young woman read bizarre New Age poetry to an audience more interested in her breasts than the poetry itself. Christian eventually entered the room. Erina put down her book, smiled, and stood up to hug him. Then she pulled him away slightly, reprimanding him for keeping her waiting. He joked that her problem was that she couldn't wait for him to come in. They both laughed at the old joke. They kissed for a few minutes before Erina reached for his belt and unfastened his pants, pulling them down around his ankles along with his underwear. The sex I witnessed was not extraordinary. It felt routine, as if they were following a well-practiced script, each knowing exactly what the next step would be. Christian struggled to maintain a consistent rhythm, like a faulty metronome, which I would have found uninteresting if I hadn't been so enraged. Around the 10-minute mark, Christian climaxed, and judging by the way Erina quickly extended her legs and threw her head back, she appeared to do the same. They lay there in silence for a few moments before he rolled onto his side, and they started kissing again. By the time they were done, I was seething with hurt and anger. The images I had seen were engraved on my consciousness like an indelible scar that could never be removed, ensuring I would be unable to forgive either of these traitors. And I was glad I had a plan to end rather than save my marriage. As I moved forward to turn off the video, I realized they had begun conversing in bed. Erina lay on her side, her head elevated, resting her right hand on her right elbow. Erina traced designs on Christian's chest with her finger. They exchanged glances, murmuring softly, and smiled with satisfaction. Erina discreetly complained about having to use the furniture business as their love nest. Christian turned on his side and responded, "Come on, Liv. If we use a hotel, we will undoubtedly leave marks. We almost got caught using one of our houses. We really have no other option." Erina shrugged. "Yes, I understand, but I wish we had another place to play. I don't like this room. Changing last week's soiled sheets to make love does not excite me." Christian stretched out and stroked her face while smiling. "We could always run away together." Erina chuckled, and Christian's demeanor became contemplative, his smile fading somewhat. "Seriously, have you ever regretted marrying John? I mean, I adore Mindy, and she's a good wife, but do you think it would have been better if you and I had married instead?" Erina sat up on the bed, practically sitting with her back against the back of the sofa and her arms wrapped around her knees, which were drawn to her chest. She looked at Christian before responding, "Come on, Christian. How many times shall we do this? Well, we've got something pretty special. But no, I don't believe it would have been better if we had married. Of course, we'd be quite happy together. But I also love John, and you adore Mindy. If you and I were together, we would be alone. John is a highly monogamous person, and he would never seek a relationship with me if I were married. And I doubt Mindy would be pleased with that either." She leaned forward and kissed Christian's cheek, caressing his chest with her left hand. "The reality is, Christian, folks like you and me have a wonderful gift: love. We can love more than one person at once. We must love more than one person. This is perfect for us. But Mindy and John aren't like that. Their self-control ensures that they will never be able to do what you and I can. They will never be able to keep their emotions under control and make everyone happy." Hearing this, my rage boiled over. I threw my documents through the office door because I adored her. Perhaps she was the only woman who ever truly loved me. I had no idea how arrogant, delusional, and narcissistic my wife was. In her mind, she transformed her infidelities into some sort of virtue for herself. Obviously, this was not an act that stabbed her life or marriage in the back, but rather one that enhanced the love in the world, which she not only had a right to, but also a moral obligation. I slept on the couch in my office that night and finished all of the paperwork. When I arrived home the following evening, Erina greeted me with her hands on her hips and a sour scowl. "Where the hell were you last night? I was worried. You did not call. You did not write. You didn't give me any idea. What the hell?" I stopped her with a raised hand. "Last night I was at work. I got drunk and couldn't go home, so I stayed there." She looked at me in confusion. "Wait, what? Are you drinking at work?" I smiled and nodded at her. She continued, "At the very least, you could tell me what is going on. I almost called the cops, and why the heck were you drinking at work?" She was still looking at me, but her inquiry was utterly perplexing. Without saying anything, I moved past her into the living room, sat down on the sofa, placed my feet on the coffee table, took the briefcase in my lap, and opened it. Erina let out an angry sigh as she followed me into the living room and sat down in a chair opposite the sofa. "How about some answers, John? Why did you drink so much at work? What happened last night? What's happening?" I continued to rummage through my case, pulling out a few folders and placing them one by one on the couch next to me. "Just a second, Liv. I'd like to straighten things up a little." I looked at the documents a little more. I removed my legs from the table, replaced them with papers, and leaned forward. I rubbed my hands together, anticipating a delicious confrontation. I grinned as I looked at Erina. "Okay, then let's get started." "What? Let's begin." "Okay, well, after what happened last night." "What about last night? What happened last night?" Erina's confrontational demeanor soon gave way to something more docile. As I began to speak, I could see a flicker of fear in her eyes. "Could you please tell me what you did last night?" I asked calmly. "Yeah, I watched the video." "Did you watch the video?" Her voice trembled slightly. "Yeah, I saw the film of you and Christian having sex on the couch in the lounge and found it upsetting. So perhaps I went a little overboard. Do you understand?" I smiled weakly, devoid of emotion. Erina's expression morphed from surprise to shock to fearful confusion. Her lips quivered, opening and closing slightly, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Her eyes darted between the papers on the table, the door, and me, as if she expected someone to burst in and fix everything. Finally, she spoke. I do not comprehend. John, what exactly are you talking about? Come on, Irina. You cannot be that foolish. I'm referring to you and Christian, and what you did yesterday and every other Tuesday for a year. I gestured at the papers in front of me. I am talking about the end of our marriage. Irina gasped and briefly covered her mouth. I waited for her to respond. John, we can work it out. I guess I can help you understand. She sounded desperate. I took a DVD from my briefcase, held it in my palms, and then pushed it across the table to her. Last night, I got a lot of information to assist me in understanding. Indeed, a veritable goldmine of new information about my adoring wife and pleasant brother-in-law. She stared at the DVD like it was a dangerous snake, recoiling slightly, but making no attempt to touch it. Come on, Liv. This is your copy. I won't tell you how I acquired it, but I have mine, for future reference, to expand on your idea of love and dedication. She leaned forward and began to stand up, and for a second, it looked like she was going to approach me. But I raised my hand to stop her. She sat back down, biting her lip. And then, gazing directly at me, she spoke slowly and methodically with a fake confidence that I suspected was intended to conceal the quivering in her voice. John, please listen. You must open your mind and think about this. There is no use in destroying your life or our lives because our ideals and talents differ. I love you and I've always been willing to accommodate our differences. I interrupted her with a faux snort. Diverse ideals and talents. Seriously, do you believe cheating on your husband is a talent? Because honestly, Liv, I believe everyone is capable of this. Talent is not the appropriate word. She took a long breath, then looked up at the ceiling before returning her gaze to me. Ability. I believe the correct word is ability. I have a bigger capacity for love, and I can and have successfully loved more than one person at once. Aside from archaic ideals about love and relationships, there are no reasons why I cannot or should not use my skills. Please just quit. You're only aggravating me with your excuses. I understand that you believe you have a special capacity that allows you to deceive, lie, and cheat when you should be faithful. But that's only Liv's excuse. Anyone can have romantic relationships with numerous persons at the same time. This does not qualify them as lovers with exceptional ability. It simply makes them cheaters. In the blink of an eye, Irina's demeanor changed from apologetic to aggressive. She was now an angry, overconfident vixen. Are you saying I'm a cheater? She attacked me. Okay, fair enough. It's most likely true from your perspective. But again, I never lost or stifled my love for you or Christian, so I never violated my emotions or compromised my feelings as a result of some archaic code that requires me to limit my relationships to one person and one person only. So while I may appear to be a cheater to you, I am perfectly content with what I see in the mirror. I have no doubts about what I did, none. Her words hit me like a slap in the face, but they also solidified my resolve. I knew now more than ever that I had to end this charade of a marriage. I leaned back, took a deep breath, and said, Well, Irina, if that's how you feel, then there's nothing more to discuss. This is the end. She was breathing heavily and fiercely. Her cheeks and chest were flushed. Her eyes were full of fire, a gaze that dared me to challenge her. And I did. Would you prefer to live like this? Some kind of open relationship with a variety of guys, loving one guy one day, then another the next? Yes, please, to each his own. But claiming you didn't cheat or were dishonest is complete nonsense, because you never told me you had sex with Christian, and you know I wouldn't do it. You know what? She felt my intensity and leaned aside slightly to avoid my gaze, but I twisted so that my eyes bore into hers and continued. So you chose to lie by omission, the greatest omission of truth I have ever witnessed. You convinced me and almost everyone else that we were a committed couple, but you went ahead and started or continued to keep Christian's cheap affairs in the furniture store hidden as best you could. You've told falsehoods and lived lies, regardless of the consequences. You have a twisted family philosophy that makes you a cheater. By this point, angry tears were pouring down her cheeks, and her mouth was tightly clenched, more angry than sad, slowly shaking her head in disagreement but seemingly unable to express her sentiments. I kept looking at her, hoping for an answer, but when nothing came, I ended the confrontation by pushing the papers closer to her. "Read it, find an attorney, this is real." Eventually, she spoke. "What if I do not want a divorce? Then you're out of luck in life because you'll receive it." I paused for a moment before adding, with a barely hidden grin, "But that does not imply you will be alone." I moved out that evening into an apartment closer to work and rapidly returned to my old self. Irina was a worker, a businessman, and a loner who did not have the time or willingness to participate in social events. My working hours became increasingly brutal. One person observed this, but I knew that if I sat at home, I would obsess over Irina indefinitely, replaying her infidelity in my head, wondering if she was thinking about me or if she was having sex with Christian. I had no alternative but to work hard and try to forget about my marriage as soon as possible. My natural instinct in any form of competition is to do whatever it takes to win, and I suspect that most individuals who know me in business would anticipate lengthy, aggressive talks to reach an agreement. But it would have resulted in delays, interaction, and discomfort, and I was willing to pay to get out of the situation fast and cleanly. I offered Irina a substantial lump sum in exchange for a quick divorce, threatening to remove the offer if she did not agree promptly. Deep down, I believe I wanted her to object so that I could insist on making the marriage work, to reject the proposal and fight for our relationship. I wanted any chance I had of saving it. I believed our marriage had to be more important to her than money. It turns out that this was not true. After some half-serious arguments, she agreed to the terms, and my marriage ended within 60 days. As one might expect, Christian began to fall behind on payments a few months after the divorce was finalized. Bernie issued stern warnings in an unpleasant letter, informing him that we would begin to take the money in any way we could. Christian called and emailed with excuses and promises, almost pleading for more time to pay. I told Bernie to play hardball and made it clear that we would exercise our rights and seek bail as soon as legally possible. On the eve of the detention, Christian pleaded to meet with me in person, which I granted. At that point, I recognized he was desperate and willing to do anything, including taking money from anyone to save himself from the wolves. I wanted the money to come from Irina. I was looking forward to the meeting. We met at my office after work. Most of the secretaries had gone home, but Sherry, my personal assistant, stayed in the outer office, ready to produce papers if necessary. Christian was more nervous than I had ever seen him before, holding out his sweat-soaked hand for me to shake as he nervously entered my office. Irina stood behind him almost timidly, and seeing her made it difficult for me to catch my breath. Irina sat closer to me than Christian. She wore one of my favorite dresses, was completely made up, and flashed her blazing smile. I had no doubt that she had come to help Christian's chances by tapping into my emotional connections with her. I instantly had an almost overwhelming desire to rush to her, hold her in my arms, and kiss her. But recognizing the risk to my feelings, I furiously controlled this instinct, drawing a melancholy expression on my face and murmuring some sort of greeting, barely acknowledging her existence. To be honest, I was astonished she came at all. I had been looking forward to this meeting for a long time and had carefully planned how it would go. I had not anticipated Irina to be there, and I was concerned that her presence might interfere with my strategy to associate her with her lover's failings. I considered resisting, perhaps requesting that she wait outside, but eventually decided that her presence would make the outcome more satisfying. Christian began by attempting to soften me up. After shaking my hand, he grinned as wide as he could and started making small talk about his desire to set things right. He wanted me to be happy and hoped I understood how much he valued me and how sad he was that things had turned out this way. I was surprised that he seemed to want to rekindle our friendship, thinking we could be buddies again. I didn't buy it. Without smiling, I glanced at him and halted his little speech as dramatically as possible. "Christian, please stop this nonsense. Your apologies are meaningless to me, okay?" He swayed in his chair as if I'd struck him. Then he pursed his lips, took a deep breath through his nostrils, and nodded in agreement before starting over. Okay, apologies, John. Let's get down to business. He stared at me as if this was my meeting and that I should continue, but I merely extended my arms in an expectant posture, waiting for him to explain his case. He lowered his lips uncomfortably and ran a quivering hand through his hair before explaining that he had every intention of returning the money but was now short on funds. He mentioned how Bernie plays hardball and expressed uncertainty about how much pressure he was under to pay. He went on to add that the business was on the verge of recovery and that with a little patience, he would be able to get his head above water. Finally, he tried to convince me that if I gave him more time, I would be in a better financial position. I leaned back in my chair, attentively scrutinizing Christian's tense smile, the thin film of sweat that had developed on his forehead, and the uncontrolled quivering of his right palm on the table between us. Christian, if you weren't a flagrant deceiver, I might consider granting you a respite. His eyes widened in surprise and distress, and he leaned forward to complain, but I stopped him with a raised hand. Come on, Christian. You must understand that it is nearly impossible to trust a man who hasn't considered screwing his married sister-in-law. You should understand that asking the woman's spouse for financial assistance is completely ludicrous. Christian shuffled uneasily in his seat as Irina hurriedly cleared her throat and spoke in a sorrowful tone, trying to intercede on his behalf. John, please, let's be reasonable. We made mistakes, but Christian is truly trying to make amends. He's sincere about fixing things and needs a bit more time. I turned my gaze to Irina, her eyes pleading and her voice shaking slightly. Irina, your pleas mean nothing to me. You both betrayed me in the worst possible way, and now you expect me to help you? Do you even realize how absurd that sounds? Irina's face flushed with a mix of shame and frustration. John, I understand you're hurt, but we can move past this. We can find a way to make things right. I let out a bitter laugh. Make things right? The only way to make things right is for you to face the consequences of your actions. Both of you. Christian, sensing the conversation slipping out of his control, tried once more. John, please, just a bit more time. I swear I'll pay back every cent. I stared at him, my expression cold and unyielding. Christian, trust is earned, and you have done nothing to earn mine. In fact, you've done everything to destroy it. There's no more time, no more chances. You both made your choices, and now you have to live with the results. Irina's eyes filled with tears, and Christian's shoulders slumped in defeat. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness as I watched them realize the gravity of their situation. They had gambled with our relationships and lost, and now they had to face the consequences. With a final dismissive wave of my hand, I ended the meeting. You can leave now. There's nothing more to discuss. As they stood up to leave, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The chapter of my life with them was finally ending, and I could begin to move forward, leaving the betrayal and heartache behind. John, please, you can't penalize Christian simply because I can do whatever the hell I want. I snapped at Irina, giving her a hostile look. Why are you here? I thought I might be able to persuade you to do it for old time's sake. I still worry about you, she began, but I interrupted her abruptly and rudely. You thought wrong. Honestly, your presence just reminds me of how Christian and you betrayed me, both figuratively and literally. So do yourself and Christian a favor by sitting back, trying to appear kind, and keeping your comments to a minimum. Her eyes welled up with tears, and her chin quivered, but she did as I said and sat back quietly in her chair. I turned back to Christian. Okay, Christian, here's how things will be. You will pay the bill on time. According to the schedule, I will begin the process of extracting everything possible from the collateral. Christian shook his head vehemently. Come on, John. You cannot take my business from me. You cannot. I can, and I will if you do not pay. Christian, my advice is to get money. Reach out to your family, find a bank, or sell something. I don't care. Just collect the money. But, as you know, banks won't lend to me. If they would, I'd have gone to them first. They just don't have that much money. I stared Christian directly in the eyes. Don't tell me that your family doesn't have money. I know they do. No, they would help if they could, but they simply cannot. How about her? I pointed a finger at Irina. Have you asked her for money? Christian sat back down. Live is not the same as living. Live doesn't. I laughed. Of course she does. I wrote her a check for $150,000. She has a lot of money. Really? Christian turned to Irina, implying he was unaware of the lump sum payment. She looked apprehensive, maybe a bit nauseated. Yes, I have it, but I need the money, she said hesitantly. I laughed again. Stop, Liv. When you first convinced me to support Christian, you told me how safe it was to give him money. Why are you hesitant now? Don't you believe Christian can get his business back on track? Don't you want to assist him, convince me that he's worth the money? If you believe this is a worthwhile investment for me, why not for you? I gave her an ugly grin. She gulped hard, briefly glanced at Christian, and then returned her gaze to me. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and said in a slightly defiant tone that she would cover the gap for a while. Christian grinned at her. She returned a feeble smile, and they walked out together, Christian with confidence and Irina with disappointment, as I held the door open for them. I left them with one final command. Remember, Christian, I don't care how. I only need the money. You will receive your money, he spit back at me. Irina appeared worried. Over the following months, I continued to seek refuge in my work, becoming more businesslike and efficient with everyone. I avoided intimate conversations at all costs, rejecting any social opportunities and preferring to work or be alone. I tried hard not to think about my wife's infidelity, but everything reminded me of her. Christian's monthly checks lay on my desk, giving me a horrible sense of satisfaction, as if I had somehow helped to bring the perpetrators of my misfortune into poverty. Mindy contacted me, and things got a little worse. She sent me multiple emails and even called me on the phone. I was astonished to find that Christian and Irina had confessed to her, albeit a mild version of the truth, of their affair, and that she had taken it hard at first, but had eventually forgiven them both. To my disappointment and terror, she faintly intimated that she suspected they were lovers and had reached an agreement in which Christian and Irina continued to see each other. She even made a half-hearted effort to persuade me to consider reconciling with Irina. My comments were caustic and cruel, and I was confident that by the end of the second call, I had left her in tears. Following that, I never heard from her again. Mindy's apparent tolerance made it clear that the emotional cost Christian and Irina incurred was much lower than I had anticipated. Now I was terrified that the story would end, that Christian would pay off his debt, that he would pay off Irina, and that they would all be pleased with the outcome, both financially and emotionally, leaving me behind, shaking their heads at the poor soul who couldn't understand what modern love was. But I needn't have worried. The furniture showroom burned down 9 months after I met with Christian and Irina. It was a stunning 2-alarm fire that threatened numerous surrounding structures and made nightly headlines. I didn't see the story, but Bernie did, and he called me right away to discuss the consequences. He was furious with me for taking such a risk, since he was certain that the trust had fled and that I had lost a huge sum of money down the toilet. I calmed him by offering to personally purchase the debt if Christian defaulted, assuring him that the property itself was valuable solely because of its location. Obvious doubts were raised about the fire, and when catalysts were discovered, the insurance company refused to pay. With no income from the store, Christian defaulted on the debt, and I bought the burning wreckage of the property, as well as 35 acres of Mississippi duck hunting territory. The criminal inquiry took nearly 6 months. The police put together a strong circumstantial case against Christian and Irina. They were able to demonstrate that the store was losing money and that Irina was spending more and more each month to keep it open. Christian made repeated frantic attempts to acquire funds from other sources, all of which failed, before secretly trying to sell the business. But there were no buyers, even at a significantly discounted price. Investigators found no proof that Irina or Christian were present in the store on the night of the fire, or that they purchased anything to start or accelerate it. However, their case was based on the assumption that they hired a professional to set the store on fire. They discovered multiple searches for the term arson on Irina's personal computer, phone records indicating interactions with at least 2 men with arson convictions, and evidence that she had withdrawn $15,000 in cash the week before the fire. Erina and Christian had a decent lawyer who she most likely paid for with whatever money she had left, and the district attorney knew he was going to face a tough fight, so he began negotiating. I believe they started with first-degree arson and fraud charges and gradually worked their way down. The defense refused to settle for anything less than fourth-degree arson, so a game of legal tag began to determine a trial date. On the first day of the trial, I was on the witness list, waiting outside in the lobby on a hard wooden bench. I was reading the newspaper and tapping my foot on the tile floor when a court official came out and announced that the trial had been canceled, that they had finally reached an agreement, and that we could all go home. I began packing my belongings to leave. Erina and Christian entered from the hallway, accompanied by several officers and their lawyer. Reporters jumped up and shoved microphones under their noses, but they refused to comment. The reporters turned to their lawyer for statements. Christian met with Mindy and exited the foyer with the officers. But Erina looked my way and approached me to talk. I must admit, I appreciated her courage in confronting me under those circumstances. So, John, is today your lucky day? Is this what you wanted? Will I be punished for my sins? I chuckled angrily and shook my head mockingly. I hope to have a faithful wife and a good marriage. I won't get what I want from you. Absent that, I only want my money, I responded. She snorted. So you're not getting any of this now, are you? I got some of it back and now have a store, she laughed. And what will you do about it? Has it quit smoking yet? You'd be surprised what a savvy businessman can do with a decent piece of real estate, even a smoking one. Her nostrils flared and her demeanor hardened slightly. She took a deep breath and then spoke again. And suddenly, you're happy alone, free of anyone tied to your employment for the foreseeable future. She offered me a knowing smirk. Do not deny it. I know you. I understand how much you dislike meeting new people. I'm working on it, Liv. I loved you, I admitted. But you're not the only woman in the world, I added. She smiled confidently. No, I'm not the only one, but I don't believe you can find what you businessmen call an equivalent successor. Whether you like it or not, you'll miss me. I leaned towards her and whispered in her ear, I might be a bit lonely, but you will be lonelier. The good news is that you'll be sharing a small area with a group of attractive, androgynous women with whom you can share all of your bountiful affection. This will benefit both you and the lesbian community. Erina's composure shattered instantly after my last statement, recoiling as if I were radioactive. Her expression turned contemptuous, and her eyes burned with anger. She took a deep breath, her chest heaving fiercely several times. Then she exploded. You're sanctimonious, self-centered, and emotionally damaged, she wailed as police hauled her away. I'm heading toward the door. You will be in the same hall as me, alone, with no one married to my slave. As I watched her shout at me, her love for me completely vanished, leaving only scornful loathing. I was struck by a sudden sense of sadness. I fought the temptation to express my grief, smiled faintly, and murmured some sarcastic comments about her public use of harsh language, but she just resumed her rant as if I hadn't said anything. But only a short time will pass until I am released from prison and able to resume my life, and you will remain alone, wishing to be with me. And then, many years later, when you're married to a dull ex-secretary, you'll regret not agreeing. The door closed behind her, abruptly silencing her ranting. I turned and left the courtroom. My day had been freed of judgment, and now, with no meetings or conferences, I fought with a growing sense of despair and loneliness. I visited the site of the fire and reflected on my life. The temperature dropped, and the wind continued to whip my jacket and sting my face as I gazed around, still unsure what to do with the wreckage. I wasn't sure if I could even salvage the situation, and all I wanted to do was sell everything, forget about the loss, and get back to doing what I'd done before. It was safe, maybe even clever, but I knew there was another choice. I could take a risk and rebuild, possibly opening another furniture store. I was considering the potential of effectively selling furniture from the same location where Christian failed. I was contemplating making a big deal out of it with plenty of advertising, billboards, and marketing campaigns to turn the narrative of failure into one of redemption and success, and possibly even TV advertisements, something Christian and my ex couldn't miss. I could even call it Erina's Furniture and have plenty of last-minute sales with catchy slogans that would be impossible to ignore. It seemed to me that the decisions I would make regarding the site mirrored the ones I had unknowingly made about my life in general. Erina was correct about me. My natural and sole social disposition prior to meeting her was to retreat, avoid the possibility of closeness, and concentrate on work. I saw myself gradually approaching a life of loneliness, a financially secure but largely unhappy existence. I reverted to doing something safe, like sitting on the concrete block. I looked around again, still assessing my alternatives and planning my future. I was caught between my anxieties and desires, the ingrained behaviors that had served and defined me, and my yearning to change and be unique. I was about to leave and return to work, letting things pass and deferring the decision until another day, when a few rays of late afternoon sun pierced through the clouds between the buildings and illuminated the graffiti-covered wall across the street. The light created a searing orange glow on the wall, giving the concrete and letters an incandescent appearance. The words were written in large white letters that were clear and easy to read. Take action. I've always disliked superstitious people and how they let meaningless, objectively irrelevant things govern their lives as signs or habits. But lying on a concrete slab in November, recalling these words felt like fate, a communication from the universe. I took out my cell phone and called the office. Hello, Sherry. What's the name of the architecture firm that created the new shopping complex that's making headlines? The one with the glass and fountains? Is it Hammerstone? Something like that? I believe she chuckled lightly to herself for a few moments as she checked. Yes, Hammerstone. Looks like they're based in Chicago. Okay, could you please arrange a meeting with them as soon as possible? Are we building something? I gazed around the neighborhood, mentally envisioning the new store, and felt a burst of confidence. Yes, I think so. I'm ready to take action. Sure, boss. Anything else? As my gaze rested on the graffiti, I tightened my lip for a brief moment. On the opposite side of the roadway, the imperative act shone brightly again. Yes, Sherry, there is one more thing. I want to make sure this new store is everything Christian and Erina failed to achieve. I want it to be a symbol of resilience and success. Let's make this place a beacon of hope and transformation, something that can't be missed by anyone. Can you do that for me? Absolutely, boss. I'll get started on it right away. As I ended the call, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The wreckage of my past life was still there, but now it was the foundation for something new, something better. I stood up from the concrete block, ready to face the future with determination and a clear vision. The sun had set and the glow on the graffiti had faded, but the message remained etched in my mind. Take action. And that's exactly what I intended to do. Do you remember the representative in the counterfeit jeans case? Brenda White is a tall blonde. I sensed Sherry's tone becoming more skeptical, and I wondered if she thought I was having a breakdown. Could you give me her phone number? Of course, boss. Do you want me to connect the call? No, I will call her myself. Thank you. I hung up and took a deep breath, contemplating my next move. The graffiti's message lingered in my mind, urging me forward. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city, but I felt a newfound clarity. As I dialed Brenda's number, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come since discovering Erina and Christian's betrayal. The pain had been immense, but it had also driven me to rediscover my own strength and resilience. I was no longer the man who retreated into work to avoid facing his fears. I was ready to build something new, something that would stand as a testament to my ability to overcome adversity. Hello, Brenda. This is John. I was hoping we could discuss a new business venture. We arranged to meet the following week, and as I ended the call, I felt a sense of anticipation. I was no longer looking back at the wreckage of my past, but forward to the possibilities of the future. The next few days were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. I worked closely with Sherry, who seemed to pick up on my renewed energy and determination. Together, we laid out the blueprints for the new store, envisioning a space that would not only sell furniture, but also symbolize hope and transformation. I decided to name the new store Resilience Furniture, a nod to my journey and a message to anyone who walked through its doors. It would be a place where people could find more than just furniture. They could find inspiration and a reminder that even in the face of betrayal and loss, it was possible to rebuild and thrive. The grand opening was planned for 6 months later, with a marketing campaign that included everything from billboards to TV advertisements. I wanted Christian and Irina to see it everywhere they turned, a constant reminder of what they had underestimated. As the weeks passed, I found myself growing more and more invested in the project. The pain of the past was still there, but it was no longer a weight dragging me down. Instead, it had become fuel, propelling me towards a brighter future. Finally, the day of the grand opening arrived. The store was everything I had envisioned and more. The turnout was incredible, with people lining up to see what Resilience Furniture was all about. As I stood at the entrance, welcoming customers, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. I spotted Christian and Irina in the crowd, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. They had come, perhaps out of curiosity or a desire to see me fail. But as they walked through the store, it was clear they understood the message. I had moved on, stronger and more determined than ever. As the sun set on that triumphant day, I knew that this was just the beginning. Resilience Furniture would stand as a beacon of hope and transformation for anyone who needed it. And I, too, had found my own resilience, ready to face whatever the future held with confidence and grace. So, what are your thoughts on our story today? Do you think it's an engaging tale with an intriguing premise and an unexpected twist at the conclusion? Share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next video.